Wow, how annoying is that? Isn't that annoying? But
That's pretty annoying.
but that's basically what that's the audio version of essentially this when you fucking just clutter an image with no sense of sort of visual composition, when it's just a bunch of you're throwing in as much detail shit as you can to be like, see how detailed it is, usually to cover up some kind of anatomical flaws or incompetence at something. It's like, I'll just throw a bunch of detail onto it.
It is
And
visual noise.
yeah, yeah, visual noise. That's really what it is. So it's like, it kind of it does remind me in a bit of that scene in Amadeus where they're trying to criticize Mozart's music and somebody just says it has too many notes or something. Which, in that case, it wasn't accurate to that. They were trying to find some thing to complain about, and it was like basically their complaint was it was too different, and so they're like, well, it's musically
Like what they would
complex.
complain about us
Yeah.
when they're
Um,
like, "Ooh,
yeah, that's
you're not allowed to make that."
or just that is fucking 100. You just boiled down every comic skate criticism, and I use criticism in giant sarcasm quotes, but comic skate's attempts at criticism. And it's funny because a lot of like people in comic skate actually think that any of them are capable of criticism, but their inherent nature of comic book nerds, and especially comic skate. Comic skate is just a niche of comic book nerds, but all comic book nerds innately are not capable of distinguishing criticism from complaint. They don't know what the difference is. They don't understand what it's sort of like the old joke about Ethan Van Sciver that Nasser Rabadi used to very much enjoy, is that Ethan Van Sciver doesn't know what gay ops means. He thinks it means telling the truth. Oh, I forgot to cross my arms. There we go. But there's other examples. Like that was a joke, but it was also provably true. The same way that Comicsgate and comic book nerds just overall don't understand the difference between complaint and critique. In fact, the saying is that nerds are only capable of complaint and not critique. Critique
Well, for
specifically.
specifically, that was actually the thing is when fucking Ethan, he accused what was it, Tim and Mark of doing gay apps,
Oh
and it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
how
That
did
was
they
another thing,
do
is
gay
that
apps?
he
What gay
said that
apps did
Tim
they
did
do?
gay ops, and Tim's gay ops were revealing that Ethan Van Sciver lied about something and used some of Ethan's DMs to prove it, and so Ethan said that was a gay op. When in reality, an actual gay op is Ethan Van Sciver making up a lie that that the SJWs were going to dox Nurkish, with which Ethan himself later came out and said it wasn't true, but he said that it was War Campaign who was trying to convince him of him, and they faked fucking screen caps or some shit, which is actually a complete contradiction of what Ethan himself had said originally back in 2018
And
about the
let's
Nurkish
face
thing.
it, at this point, again, this is old news.
Yeah,
We know he
well
knew this
trodden.
was
Yeah,
bullshit.
it's been covered, but
He was
it
openly
fucking
lying. We
connects
can
to
patch
the
that.
overall
We can patch that.
dishonesty of, like, the thing is, this fucking picture came out, and there's been a lot, like, people are like, oh, it's just a big fucking mess, and Comicsgate
Because it is a mess.
apologists and simps basically had one giant conniption trying to cope for this picture, which it does have a lot of detail and it's got style, but that's the thing, as we've sort of shown in an example, is that a song that sounds good is good, but a like 10 songs that sound good all played simultaneously is just an incoherent
Oh
mess.
no! You know what's even a better example than that? Actually, is I forget where it was. It was something we heard on the radio of some guy. It was like a football player doing the national anthem before a game,
Oh
and
yeah,
he's
well
like trying to like
that's what they
jazz
refer
it
to
up.
as the butter notes, and that's still not even
Yeah,
necessarily an example because that was still just the one guy, but he was doing the and the wickets
yeah, and he's just like going
just
all over the place,
fucking
and it sounds terrible because he's bad at it, He's not a good singer.
Well,
either.
the guy was a good singer, but he was just way overplaying the whole thing to
People
the
were
point where
booing
it
though.
was
He really wasn't a
ridiculous.
good singer. First off, that's not what a good singer does.
Well,
And secondly, he
on
wasn't really hitting the notes.
on a technical level, I forget exactly. I actually forget the specific.
I
I know what you're
remember
talking about, but I forget if it was a guy who legitimately couldn't sing or if it was one of those guys who could sing but was overplaying it. Because there are a lot of examples
he could
of
sing.
shitty renditions of the national anthem.
Yeah, he could sing, but he had no idea what he was doing,
Yeah,
and he
it's an
basically was
element of singing. Just that's the thing is that maybe you can draw, but if you can't compose a coherent image, first
like
of
you.
all,
Yeah,
I understand
somebody
this
might
as
be
a
really
poster.
good
It's
at
like, okay,
fucking giving the lines out at compositions or something, but it's not enough to be able to do that. And this is actually specifically about comic art. If this isn't a page from a comic, then it's a fine drawing, I
yeah,
guess.
it's
But it's
fine for like
bad
a
comic
poster
art.
that is just meant to be in the background, and you look at it and just go, okay, and it's like, well, it's visually detailed or something. But the thing is that if this is
Is
going to need
but
color
the
to
thing
save
is,
it.
and I don't know if you're looking at the notes. The key thing is, and this is the first note I wrote, is what is the subject? It's the
Yeah,
simplest question if you're making art at all. If you're making comic art in particular, what is the subject? And the answer here is apparently big shelves.
yeah, fuck it, just
That's the
fucking
subject is a whole
things
bunch of shelves.
and bugs. Well, the one with the one of the lab isn't here. I'm looking at the cyberfrog one that just has a bunch of bugs and stuff. This one's probably a better example. The other one I
Yeah,
couldn't
well,
even
yeah,
fucking
that's even
find.
worse. That one's even worse.
Yeah, but I mean,
But
it's
also it's
fucking.
like
It's
because it's
all
a
the
comic.
same example of the same point too. Is that here's what you wrote though is the drawing of the guy in the lab and some CG dipshit being like, those little Eichmanns are gonna shit brick when they hear this crunchy groove. Was we immediately compared it to the whole point is like this is gonna trigger the SJW so much they hate this. I'm sure and it's like nobody gives a shit. Nobody in your movement cares. Nobody outside the movement cares, and you're immediately reduced to cope over like just a big clusterfuck of an image. Now, if this is a poster or something, then it's like okay, it's it's a poster. It's a fucking once it's colored and shit. Then I'm sure people are gonna fucking spurg out about how great it is as a poster. But ultimately, the character is irrelevant. Nobody likes the character. Nobody likes any of the characters. Nobody likes Cyberfrog. And the only exception is the people who are like the hippies in the South Park episode. They're like, those little Eichmanns are gonna be so pissed when they hear this crunchy groove. And it's like, no,
Comicsgate is
nobody's going to
essentially
care when they hear this crunchy groove in your fucking
Comicsgate is
stupid
essentially the hippies
music
from the
festival.
hippie driller episode.
Yeah,
That's exactly who they are.
one of the best episodes of South Park in history. But that's what Comicsgate is. They're the hippies from the hippie driller episode. Is they're so convinced that what they're doing is making a difference. Meanwhile, nobody gives a shit, and they're just sort of piling up and fucking cluttering everything up. And that's really what this is too. This
Because of
fucking
course they
poster or
don't want to
whatever the
make
fuck it
comics.
is.
They don't want to make comics. They don't want to create stories. They don't want to be storytellers, and they don't want to make art. They
And
just
that's
want
another
your
thing.
money for as little work as possible.
This poster is for something that is ultimately irrelevant and nobody actually likes. Even the fans of the comic, they don't have anything good to say about it aside from the usual old cope of, oh, the art. The art is, ma art is, it's like fucking the Martina thing, ma art Tina, the Lady Alchemy thing is anytime anyone outside of your movement sees it and they laugh at you, you're living in an echo chamber, and that's what Comicsgate is.
I think that's also in the notes. Is just as much as I'll fucking slam on Stenkaroonie, is he does kind of represent the mindset of pretty much everybody who is reading manga instead of comics nowadays.
Yeah,
Is they look at your American style art and they fucking want to spit.
yeah. Let's see here the notes specifically. As comic art, it's
Brilliant.
terrible because the subject is obscured by a fuckload of visual noise and garbage. That's what you wrote, and
And
it
you
was a
know
good
this
point.
wasn't hard work either. He makes one page a month.
Yeah,
This isn't hard work for
this
him.
isn't
He
his though.
stretched
This
this
isn't.
out.
This is not by Ethan. Ethan didn't do this.
Okay, yeah, that's also important. It doesn't matter
But it's
if he
also
did it
what
or not.
Ethan does. Like, if you look at Ethan's actual art, he does the same thing, except his is to cover up a lot of anatomical flaws and incompetence that is just, like, fucking, the perspectives are always wonky and incorrect. Things are inconsistent. The figures are like he doesn't draw Cyberfrog the same way every time because he just made Cyberfrog as this big jumbled mess of pointless details that don't match and don't work together. So he can't even do like a consistent like a character sheet or a reference sheet. In fact, his reference sheets, he's shown reference sheets where they don't even match up with each other. And it's like, how's this supposed to be a reference sheet when you can't go? It's like one view and then another view, they don't match each other. The front view and the side view are inconsistent from each other. It doesn't make sense. And a lot of other professional artists have looked at Ethan's art and been like, okay, this is fucked up, this is flawed. He doesn't do the light source correctly on this. And the thing is that in order to cope with that, other people in Comicsgate look at other people's art and go, oh, well, yeah, this is flawed then. And it's like, okay, but all you're doing is misdirecting. You're doing the whataboutism. That's all Comicsgate has ever been able to rise to is, well, what about this guy? And it's like, I don't care about this guy. I'm looking at your shit, and your shit sucks. You're bad at art too. And of course, John Malin was another person who was desperate. Like, you could hear his voice start to shake again as he was so desperate to simp for Ethan's art or fucking this guy's art. I forgot who this guy is, but fucking I don't care. And nobody else really knows. Like, this guy will never be as well known as, the fucking artist for Berserk or One Punch Man or fucking even Fairy Tail or whatever the fuck is. Those people are, or fucking the artist for Bleach or the artist for One Punch, or fucking One Piece, not One Punch, but those artists are known by millions, whereas this guy is known by thousands, maybe at best. You mentioned though, yeah, it's the subject is obscured by a fuckload of visual noise, and I'm sure some people will have all sorts of different copes, like, oh, it's the style, or you can tell the fucking thing, just they'll have all sorts of excuses. But ultimately, or also there will be like, well, it will look better after it's colored, and just all this shit.
But again, I mean, if it'll look better after it's colored, why'd you post it?
Yeah, exactly. The excuses are relevant. It's like fucking.
Your excuses are your own.
Your excuses are your own. Yeah. But anyways, as comic art, it's terrible because the subject's obscured by visual noise. Maybe it could be salvaged by the coloring. Also, the point is, when you draw cross-hatching all over your characters, you make your art shittier and it's more work. And Stenker Rooney was right that no one likes how American art even looks. And that's basically the sum up of the whole thing. But the thing is that if I saw this, I would be like, oh, it's just a big fucking mess, and I would dismiss it. But the thing is that it doesn't become funny like until the lol cows come out in desperate defense of this, like fucking John Malin, who is a lol cow the same way that Ethan Van Sciver is, and a lot of other people. And people will say, of course this is good, there's all this detail. But again, if you play 10 songs all simultaneously, there'll be a lot of detail, doesn't mean it's good. And you can give the excuse that this isn't that cluttered to the point where you can't tell what the fuck's going on. But it, like, in black and white, it's still a mess. And it's still, like, desperately trying to bolster up something that,
you definitely can't
nobody
tell what's going
actually
on, but that's
likes.
also part of the fucking problem with American art, where there's no sense of motion. That's actually something that I didn't realize myself until you were the one getting into comics, and you were like pointing out, like, from other artists who made art, who fucking looked at everything.
Well, like manga, especially
American comic art.
But no, like, I actually got a book. I forgot why, but I got this book that was about, like, comic art, and it was a bunch of comic artists of various kinds, in American ones, but it had stuff from like Mike Mignola and that kind of thing. And it showed examples of like when to wash out the backgrounds entirely, just replace the background with white to better frame the fucking specific action happening in the thing, or sometimes how to handle backgrounds and that kind of thing, and motion and visual motion, and how to portray it. Whereas, I think Understanding Comics has some of that too, to some extent, and you could tell, like, if I started really noticing, especially in Berserk, is that style of the visual motion blur that was literally just pen lines drawn across on a solid surface to show it, making it look like it was blurry as it was moving through the air, like for Guts' sword and that kind of thing is a perfect example. And when you look at American comic art, it doesn't have any of that, and it makes the art and the visuals look so much less dynamic and impactful, and just anything else that makes comic art really pop. Whereas this is a perfect example, because in Cyberfrog, we reviewed Cyberfrog, and this was another example. In the comic, there's no sense of motion, and it looks like a bunch of stock static poses kind of pasted over each other. And this image, this poster here, actually looks better to make it look dynamic, but notice how hard it has to try to make it look more dynamic. And another thing is that if you look at it long enough, you can, and if you're familiar with the characters, you can sort of distinguish them, but it's like Cyberfrog's arm that's up kind of looks like it's just part of the fucking other guy that's behind him and shit. And then, of course, there's all these bugs around him, and it's almost impossible to tell which are part of the other guy and which are just the bugs or something. It doesn't have a good understanding of visual distinctiveness between figures. It's intentionally supposed to be a mess, which is kind of, it goes back to that old argument of, well, it's supposed to be bad, which is
stylistically designed to be that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
that too.
bad. It's okay that which is something. Hey, who's doing that? Oh, that's right. It's those left-wing SJW fucking people complaining,
making excuses for movies that suck. They're like, well, they're supposed to be bad. Don't you understand? It's not supposed to be good. That was the review of the Matrix 4. Is it supposed to be bad? Don't you understand? It's supposed to be bad because it's self-aware, and it's like, okay, but it's still bad. So I don't give a shit. And that's what this is, except without even that self-awareness. But here's the thing, is that this is just for the art. We don't actually care about the art, and we never did. The criticism, the real criticism we always had, always, for years, going back years before Comicsgate even, was that these stories aren't good, and never have been good, and never were going to be good, because they're not by people looking to tell a good story. They're by people looking to sell their ideology. That's it. They're just selling their politics and couching it as, oh, and by the way, I have a comic. Buy the comic to support my politics. That's what all Cyberfrog ever has been. And it's why you never see anyone saying they really love how Cyberfrog had this character moment or this interaction. Nobody ever says that, and nobody ever will say that, except until after we put out this video, and then somebody in Comicsgate will try to do it as a cope, but it will ring completely hollow, of course, as everything they say always does, because they're just doing it as a reaction to try to cover up like an embarrassing moment. And
I might be there to give a fuck.
And also, they have no clue what they're talking about when they try to talk with any authority about any. And it's funny because they're fucking supposed to be people who are all about comics, but when they talk about comics, they're utterly
industry
clueless.
veterans. Again, industry veterans, and they're being outdone by novices and hobbyists.
And again, one of the perfect examples, aside from our comics, of course, is we bring this up every time because it's a perfect example. And I could bring up literally my own comic or Villains of the Snow Sea every time. But the thing is that those are just a couple of examples. I think the best example that anyone can look at is Common America, specifically because it has a lot of people specifically talking about how they like the story and specific moments in the story and specific character interactions
They're able
in
to
the
actually
comic
point at
itself.
stuff that's happening,
Nobody has ever done that for a single Comicsgate comic.
and it's not possible.
Yeah, not for Richard's comics, not for Ethan's comics, and even the people who fucking walked away from the movement used to fucking try and simp for the comics in some way, but never in a way that was like, oh, this character was really good because all the characters, like, remember fucking we reviewed this and point this out, fucking Jawbreakers and Iron Sights. There weren't any characters in them. There were just fucking cardboard cutouts that had a visual design, and that was it. They didn't have distinct personalities. They didn't say anything, which is why
Yeah, I
after
didn't know
we
their
did
name.
that video, Richard started hiring other writers to make his comics for him because he saw our review and knew we were right. And that's not my speculation. Other people have confirmed that.
I can speculate. I can afford to speculate on
Yeah,
this
well, the
shit
thing
now.
is that it's easy to
I've
speculate
earned
because
the right.
it's easy to see how obviously true it is. He came out with a comic. We were the only ones in all of history to accurately critique it with fucking in-depth analysis, legitimate critical analysis that is still to this day absent from every single supporter of Comicsgate, current or former. And after that happened, after we did that, Richard C. Meyer hired writers to make his comics for him. So there's no denying that we pointed out the biggest problem was his writing. And other people even pointed that out, but they didn't do it as well as we did because we've seen other people's reviews, critical reviews of Richard's comics, and they would just be like, well, this part of the story doesn't really make sense. And so they wouldn't be able to explain how. They would just say that doesn't make sense. Whereas we would go
And even
into
his
incredible
defenders.
depth pointing out how and how could have been done better, how we
People on
would have
his
done it,
side who
all
were
that kind of
trying to
shit.
talk up the comic in the hope that they could sell the ideology of Comicsgate and, owning the libs, triggering the libs, running a fucking
Yeah, that's
independent
all they really
Nazi
wanted
wing.
to do. Not even to make comics, but just to be like, we're triggering the libs, and it's like that's not enough. Well,
Yeah, that is not a goal.
yeah, it's not a real goal. It's not even a real thing to be in favor of. It's really just a fucking way of rephrasing what you're against. And if you're really making a movement or anything, it has to be what you're for, not what you're against. First, right up front. But anyways, yeah, that was the other thing though about Jawbreakers and that kind of stuff is really Comicsgate should have been paying us directly for our reviews because we fix their comics for them. And again, this isn't my opinion. Just look at what we had to say about Lone Star, or remember what we had to say about Lone Star. We found editorial errors in that. Just as we did for Jawbreakers, of course. Jawbreakers had objective flaws with the editing of the story, in which, first of all, any real editor would look at the story for Jawbreakers, Lost Souls at the very least, and say, okay, there's no heart to it, there's no character. You got to go back, put the heart into it. And Richard would not know what that means or how to do that. So that's why in response, he just like tried to pay Chuck Dixon to do it for him in the aftermath. But again, Comicsgate should be paying us for the fucking for us not even intentionally saving their movement, but we keep them honest more than they want. The problem is they don't want to be kept honest. They don't want to be analyzed. They just want to be praised without any fucking questioning. And we proved that. That's not an opinion. That was objectively proven already by us years ago. In fact, it was like 2018 when we proved that Comicsgate does not want to be questioned or analyzed in any way. And they get angry about it. In fact, we were the first ones to show that they get angry about it. Anyways, so that wraps up that. And again, more stuff, the in-depth reviews, the deep dives, all that stuff. The real videos are on our Subscribe Star. That's pretty good. In fact, there's a bunch of really good stuff going on up on our Subscribe Star right now, including the full review, the internet's first ever review of Cyberfrog 2, which is very in depth and contains more critical analysis than you will ever see in all of the Comicsgate comics ever made, or Comicsgate reviews of any comic ever made combined.
We're not just beating them to the punch.
We're beating them to death. Inshallah. And so, I mean, psychically and fucking in a way, literally, considering what's apparently happened behind the scenes with a couple of them lately. Too bad, I guess. But then again, I guess karma sometimes is real, apparently. I mean, that's that part's just my speculation. But it is backed up with actual results, too, and in that case. And again, if more of that ensues, it's really from their own, the backfiring of their own actions. So, yeah, check out our Subscribe Star for all the extra stuff, and also to fucking be supporting us for, like, if you're in Comicsgate, you should have been supporting us first, because we're the real thing, whereas you've been supporting the fake people and the grifters
and words
all along.
I don't think I want their support anymore, but then again, they don't deserve to fucking have the choice.
Well, it's too late for them anyways, but they also didn't want to be kept honest or to have any real critical analysis. That is,
they don't want the good comics too. They say they want. We want better comics. Here's how you get better comics. No.
Well, yeah, they would get they actually get angry at the truth, and that's what the real legacy of Comicsgate is. They were told the truth and got angry about it, and we're the living proof of that. We've shown that in thousands of examples over just the past couple of years alone, but also going back to the beginning of the entire movement, we proved objectively that every single person in Comicsgate, even people who left the movement, like Doug Ernst is actually a good example of somebody who got angry over objective facts and objective reality and the truth.
Which is, that was
back in 2017.
He revealed himself with a giant red flag right at the beginning, and that's so good.
And that's the thing is that he's now considered one of the antis, and Ethan Van Sciver hates him openly. But the fucking thing is that they were all essentially part of the same movement. They wanted the same thing, which was to be cucked by cape shit, ultimately. And they didn't want to be kept honest, and they wanted to worship status, and they wanted to just have a popular movement, not a correct movement. All of them, even if they don't like each other. Whereas we have been morally consistent before all of them and still are. So that's why, in fact, that's why you should have listened to Shitty Webcomics.